Anime has become very much known for its tropes, repeating concepts, and staple ideas. And when you break it down into different genres, you find that those each have their own specific reoccurring aspects that have become synonymous with the genres themselves, for better or for worse.
I am disgusted.
We all know that if we're starting up an isekai, that we're just waiting for the protagonist to get mowed down by a truck so we can, get the show on the road. Side note, y'all ever wonder what happens to that person who is driving the truck? Like, did they go to jail, or are they just in therapy for the rest of their lives over the guilt of running over some 14-year-old? I'd watch that show. Or that in any harem, it's only a matter of time until some dude trips and accidentally gropes the absolute mess out of some girl. So funny. But anyway, we all know for the foreseeable future, tropes and cliches are the name of the game, and the Shonen series probably have the most ingrained and mainstay cliches out of all genres. Power-ups and transformations, over-the-top and dramatic emotional expressions, and the power of friendship are just a sample of the common things that are associated with the shonen genre. And hey, guess what? Those tropes and cliches are exactly the things that we love and latch on to. They're the things that get you hype at 3 a.m. when you know that you should be sleeping because you have work in the morning. And it's what keeps you on that 1,000+ chapter/episode grind of One Piece from start to finish. But even though there's so much to love within those tropes, there are obviously times where they go a bit overboard or are just kind of done poorly. Times where the power of friendship is just a bit too strong, or those emotional and energetic outbursts are just a little bit too over the top. It happens sometimes.
It is what it is.
But there are those tropes that seem to inherently have a much harder time at being consistently well done, their success rate being far more mixed. And as of late, one of the mainstay shonen anime tropes that has definitely been giving me mixed feelings is that of the large supporting cast of characters. Large supporting casts are one of shonen's best, most enjoyable, and greatest aspects. Varying designs, personalities, skills, cultures, and origins give an author or illustrator a chance to flex their creative muscles. And it makes it so that finding a character to latch on to, relate to, or invest you into a series is almost a guarantee. Because even if the main character or characters aren't doing it for you, there's always another peeking out from behind some wall, beckoning you down a dark alley where God's light will not reach you. Alongside that, when done well, having a cast of characters that extends beyond the main or mains can do a lot to flesh out a world or a story as a whole. It can show that the cogs of whatever magical school or assassin village keep turning with or without the protagonist. Entire narratives and side stories can be played out independently or intertwined with the main story being told, where motivations can be explored and mentalities can change and grow in ways that help elevate their roles and stakes in a story, to where following their growth is just as interesting and compelling as following that of the main character. But of course, this only happens when these characters are written with love, care, and intent. And if, like me, you've followed many shonen series over the years or just anime in general, you're probably aware that that is not always the case. Because we all know that often for every side character that gets a spotlight shown on them, there's another 5 or so being left behind till we need a cool picture of all the characters posing together. And as a reader, it can be truly sad to watch a character that you really like with the coolest design or the best motivations or most interesting implications for the world or story as a whole just fade into irrelevancy.
Please! No!
Shout out to my boy Lemillion. These happenings are fairly prevalent in shonen series, so why is that? Well, I'm no expert or anything, so I can't give you a true, scholarly, I know what I'm talking about answer.
I know some of these words.
But these are just some thoughts from a dude who's watched quite a bit of the successful and not so successful attempts at making these large casts of supporting characters. And I just thought it would be fun if we could kind of think this all out together. So feel free to join me on my little thought adventure. First off, I think we gotta clarify what we even mean when we talk about a large cast of supporting characters. Obviously, shonen series tend to have a lot of characters by nature. Dozens of characters can be introduced in just one arc. Look at One Piece's Dressrosa arc and all the fools that were spawned from the abyss like they're best friends with Manus. So, would all of those characters be included? And what even really constitutes as large? Well, honestly, I think it's kind of subjective. But for the sake of our video here, we'll describe them as a group of supporting characters that are in league with the core characters, with numbers greater to or equal to that of the core characters. Now, whether or not that definition is understandable, I think that examples will clear up any confusion that you may have. For example, Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and kind of Kakashi would be the core characters, and the rest of the Genin squads and maybe even their Jonin would be the supporting cast of characters. Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki versus the rest of Class A. Natsu, Lucy, Gray, etc., and the rest of Fairy Tail. So this excludes any characters that are one-offs, arc-specific, or just aren't close enough to our main cast. Make sense? Alright, so the first thing that comes to my mind when I try to come up with an explanation for these mixed results is the Dragon Ball Z effect version 2. That being that as the main characters grow and get stronger alongside the increasingly powerful villains, it gets to the point where most of the characters just can't keep up. You have a character like Tien who showed up in Dragon Ball and was instantly devastated. Then once Z starts, he's no longer ever able to compete for the rest of the series. And you may be thinking, oh, well, you know, he got to fight in the Tournament of Power and stuff and he didn't. No.
Stop it. Get some help.
And the rest of the Z fighters kind of follow suit to where now in Super, the only characters that are truly relevant are Goku and Vegeta. And this is an issue that seems to be fairly prevalent in combat and competition series, where the overwhelming growth of the main characters leave the supporting characters in the dust. And now you're only left with the memory of when your favorite character did that one cool thing and you know that they're never gonna get anything like that again. Naruto, Bleach, Boku no Hero, even something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Kuroko no Basket has a problem where many of the characters are simply taken out of the same league as our main forces, left to spectate, commentate, or just be used as a warm-up or example for the antagonist. But okay, we all know that that can be a thing, so the question is why? Okay, well, if we look at a series where something like this happened, what do we notice? Well, if we look at Kuroko no Basket, well, the first thing I see is that there's a lot of characters. Being that it's a sports series, you have to have enough characters to comfortably fill out a team. So if we say that Kuroko and Kagami are our main characters, that leaves 9, 10 if you include Riko, other characters that are going to be ever present throughout the entirety of the series. So if you take just those 9 characters, you have to find 9 different and unique ways to tell a story of growth and improvement for each one of them, finding multiple instances within the story to show those times of struggle and growth, all while doing the same for your arguably more important main characters and antagonists, though I imagine that it's really difficult. And that's not to say it's impossible, because it's not. Haikyuu being an example where, for the most part, does a really good job at giving its very large cast of characters the space to grow and time in the spotlight. We see all of, if not most of the characters have hardships, struggles, as they all attempt to grow and get stronger, to stand alongside each other. So we know that allowing your supporting characters to stay relevant, power or ability wise, can be done even if there are a lot of characters. So maybe the question as an author is more about what value does doing so have? Should I take on this monumental task of creating these crazy instances of growth for these 9+ characters? Can only be answered based on what the focus of your story is. Because depending on what your focus is, drastically affects what you choose to highlight and what you choose to leave in the shadows. Going back to Haikyuu, a driving force and focus is specifically on the interpersonal relationships between the teammates, and how they consciously and unconsciously push each other forward to become better players as individuals, but also for the greater good of the team. When Ryu is struggling with his perceived averageness, Hinata's words push him forward in a way that not only benefits himself, but the team as well. When Yamaguchi sees how amazing the rest of his team is and he knows that he can't do what they can, he finds a way to fight alongside them in his own unique way. And just everything about how Daichi is the entire backbone of that team. The focus of that show is the intrinsic link between the players and the team as a whole, and each individual has to keep up with each other in their own way to make that Karasuno dynamic work, whether they're the main character or not. But if you look at Kuruko, that's not really the case. The focus is completely different. In Kuruko, the plot revolves around the generation of miracles, 5.5 insanely gifted basketball prodigies that are only really rivaled by each other, their abilities making them the complete cornerstone of their individual teams. And we follow Kagami as he grows to rival their power with the support of Kuruko, who is that half in the generation of miracles. The focus is much more individualistic. Essentially, one character, Kagami, striving to become the best. Even though basketball is obviously a team sport, the take on it within the series is much more focused on an individual that is the complete driving force of the team. So while characters like Hyuga and Kiyoshi do get screen time, they, and especially the others,
Who are you?
inevitably do not come close to being able to stand alongside Kagami, because they just don't need to. They do not align with the focus of Kagami becoming a Generation of Miracles level player. To a certain degree, he can do that with or without them. Them being as good or comparably as good in some other area just isn't that important. And if we look at other series where this Dragon Ball Z Effect version 2 takes place, you can see that there's that similar pattern. The focus of Goku becoming the strongest, bestest monkey man doesn't really require any of his comrades to stand beside him anymore. The focus of Naruto becoming strong enough to become not only Hokage, but also stand aside literal gods while imposing his ideology, by nature kinda means that he has to stand above everyone else. So if you think about it like that, it's kinda not surprising that so many characters often lose relevancy, because I'd imagine that if you're an author writing a series, you might think, well, me having them keep up with XYZ main character just isn't that important. I mean, we all know Piccolo isn't gonna be the one to defeat the main bad guy, so maybe you're thinking, why even bother trying to push him at all? If that's truly an ideology that an author might have, it's clearly understandable. For the readers or the watchers, however, it's just disappointing. Also, I wonder if authors might see having these secondary and supporting characters closer to the main ones as an active detriment to their focus. And this concept might go beyond just power levels, but also with general development and progression as well. Because maybe if we give too much development to supporting characters or take too much time away from the mains, then maybe it seems like the main isn't special. Because if everyone's super,
No one will be.
there have definitely been instances where side and supporting characters have stood out far more and overshadowed the main character. A personal example of this for me would be JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind. Each member of La Passione is so developed, charismatic, and impactful on the series that they kind of quite easily overshadow Giorno in literally every way for me. And if you're an author who wants the main character to be the ultimate superstar of the series, you might not want that happening. So sometimes I wonder if there's almost a purposeful neglect with some of these side characters. Maybe. But actually, let's go back to numbers really quick.
You want the numbers, Mason?
There's a lot of characters in these casts. Like, look at Bleach. Just how many characters can we say fall under that definition of the large cast of supporting characters? A few of the 13 captains, a few of the vice captains, Yoroichi and Kisuke, and just there, you have at least 10. And that's being pretty exclusive with who gets to be part of the buddy club. I mean, look at Fairy Tail. That's an entire organization, my dude. And as I said before, filling out these rosters like this is great for the world and character diversity, but I imagine the more characters, the more difficult it is for someone not to get left out. I mean, it's not a coincidence that series with smaller, tight-knit casts seem to be most developed individually and interdependently. Shows like Yu Yu Hakusho, where the main and supporting cast only comes out to about 10. Where if you compare that to these shows where casts have these large numbers of characters, the further out you get from the main squad, the more generic these friendships and relationships become. And of course, that's not to say that small equals good and large equals bad, because that's not the case. Like I said before, Haikyuu does a great job at this, and even though I called out Bleach for having all of these characters, they often do get the time to shine and develop. However, it seemingly takes a lot of effort to do that just for main characters, even more so with secondary characters. More than effort, it takes a lot of time. And I think that's probably the biggest factor that can lead to these characters just getting left in the dust. That is that there's just too many characters and too little time. Every story has a destination that it's trying to arrive at. The story of One Piece will end, presumably, when Luffy becomes king of the pirates. Diamond is Unbreakable ends when we catch the person who's murdering all these people and leaving hands everywhere. And the story of Naruto ends when he becomes the Hokage. That is, until you keep the series going so that you can make money off of it. But still, every story has a point that it's trying to get to, and with shonen, a lot of times that point is told to us and baked into the story from the very beginning. And you only have so much time to devote to things that don't get you to that point. Because if you do devote too much time to things outside of that goal, then you run the risk of seeming bloated and unfocused. And you might have your readers or watchers wondering,
right, where are we going?
So when you have to make sure that X, Y, and Z happens in a satisfactory manner so that everything with our protagonist and main story adds up in a satisfactory way, how do you allocate time for pit stops and detours for characters that don't get that story to where you're trying to go? Now, depending on the concept of the story or how long the series is planning on being, can affect how well or how many pit stops can be taken along the way. One Piece by nature is perfectly designed to have the time to take detours, as it's a series about adventuring and going from different places, learning and growing along the way. So by its own construction, there's almost an infinite amount of time baked into the concept of its story. And Oda could take all the time he wants to characterize or flesh out anything that he chooses. Just throw another island in the middle of somewhere and now you have time. However, think on Naruto. Where can we realistically put a segment to flesh out a character like Kiba? He's close enough to Naruto to be part of the supporting cast, as he's part of the same Genin generation, but he's not close enough to be personally relevant to him like Hinata or Shikamaru. He has no connection to any of the villains, he's not strong enough to just be a fighting force. So how can you really find a space to go into him as a character when you have to worry about explaining the motivations of the Akatsuki, displaying Sasuke's descent into darkness, or the world pushing back against Naruto's ideology? Kiba basically has two main moments. Three if you count his ridiculous statement of saying he's gonna become Hokage. The first is his fight with Naruto in the Chunin exams. And while he obviously is involved, the primary focus of that fight is progressing Naruto. In that moment, Kiba is basically a vehicle to get the main character where he needs to be. And then Kiba's second moment is a fight which, while he does do his best, he ultimately loses and has to be saved by someone who he has no real connection with, unlike how Gaara saved Lee and Tamari saved Shikamaru. Those were his only two moments to really develop. And after that, the story drastically shifts and there's no real space for him anymore. And most of the others in his generation kind of don't get the space to grow either. They might show up from time to time, but they aren't usually that important. It's tough, and there's only so much time. So realistically, I imagine another question on an author's mind isn't how do I make the time or space, it's should I make the time or space? Because there's other more important characters and things that need that development, and we gotta get where we're going eventually. Seemingly, the unfortunate reality is many of these supporting characters, while cool or interesting, were never really meant to be that relevant or important to the actual story being told.
You're basic.
Yeah, I noticed.
So as an author under the extreme pressure of the weekly manga machine, I would imagine that you might think, why donate time to what isn't actually relevant to the story? Boku no Hero is probably the best example of an extremely large amount of characters who have absent or fleeting relevance to the story being told, and as a result, are kind of just left as props. Out of the 21 characters of Class A, if we exclude Aizawa and the three main boys, I would say that maybe 4 if I'm being really generous, are truly relevant to the story, while all the other students, and honestly even kind of those 2 to 4, still fall somewhere in the categories of supposed to be important but haven't really been able to do anything, specific instance or momentary relevance, and then the final category of just go home, son, you really don't have to be here.
I hate to say it, I hope I don't sound ridiculous. I don't know who this man is.
But we can't exactly just remove the Kibas and the Rikudos of the world, right? Because while they may not be relevant or have that much development or progression, they still do kind of need to be there so that the world or the scenario seem more fleshed out and realistic. Because if you're gonna have a series about a school or academy, making named and intricately designed characters is probably a better and more fun option than just having generic, unnamed, or shadow people. Because, like I said before, having a large and diverse cast is super cool and beneficial for the audience and the creator. But what seems to end up happening with your Class A's and your basketball teams is that you've made characters important to the setting, but not the story being told. And when that happens, it's not exactly hard to see why some of these characters end up getting left behind. But also, let's not blow this issue out of proportion, right? Like, there are plenty of shows out there that do a serviceable to amazing job at giving these side characters development, progression, and the spotlight. So then, what can we see from a show that does this well? I know that Black Clover is a fairly polarizing series, but regardless of that, I think that Black Clover should be praised for its characters. The Black Bulls get everything that we've said that characters left in the dust don't. They get the development, the progression, and the spotlight. Who they are as people is well defined, and they all learn, grow, and better themselves. Not only that, but they also get the time to show that off on multiple occasions. Also, because they primarily function as a team, they're constantly relying on each other and needing to progress and keep up for each other's sake as well. Just like with Haikyuu, even characters that are kind of outside of the loop still get a good dosage of care. Yuno, Mimosa, Klaus, the Leons, all consistently get that author attention. So why is that? Well, I think that this is a case where the characters are just better built into the narrative and the plot points. As a result of being better integrated, they bypass a lot of the problems that tend to happen. They get the time so they can develop and grow. They're allowed to keep up in terms of strength and usefulness because the focus, especially with the Black Bulls, is their unity and friendship. And they're allowed to exist outside of the main protagonist, Asta. And if we look at the series where you have some of the best supporting characters, these are the patterns that you kind of tend to see. Without these, whether it's because you just have too many characters, you don't want them shining too hard, they aren't very necessary, or you just don't have the time to do much with them, it'll be very easy to let these characters slip into the background for one reason or another. Because writing is tough, especially when you're in a serialized publication, and thus the trope tends to get constantly mixed results. Large supporting casts of characters will probably always be a thing when it comes to shonen, and will always be one of the coolest things about them. And of course, no show is perfect, right? Even in shows with a good cast of supporting characters, there can still be 1 or 2 characters that kind of fall away. And in shows where the extended cast maybe isn't so developed, there can be 1 or 2 that really stick out. I just hate to see some of these characters go to waste or be underappreciated or underutilized by the series itself. I mean, it really is a conundrum. Hello everyone, with that we're gonna bring this video to a close. Let me know what you think about the whole large cast of shonen characters thing. Do you see where I'm coming from, or do you think it's just not really a big deal? Heck, even let me know some of the characters that you're sad to have seen get left behind, and even why you think that happened. And if you enjoyed the song playing in the background, the link to it will be either in the description or the annotation thingy, maybe even both. I hope that you got some enjoyment out of this video and that you'll like and subscribe and maybe come back for the next one. So if you made it this far, thanks.